Welcome to the backyard here at Saddlewood Drive. My name's Chip Studer, continuing with our weekly video series that we're calling Along the Path. There are several places in the Bible that God uses the path or the roadway or the wayside as a metaphor to teach us life lessons. We want to look at one of those today. It's a very familiar parable that Jesus told to a bunch of his followers entitled The Seed and the Parable of the Seed and the Sower. We can find that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospel. We want to look at it today from Luke's perspective. Let me read to you what Luke has to say about the seed and the sower. And when a great multitude had gathered, and they had come to him from every city, he spoke by a parable. A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trampled down, and the birds of the air devoured it. Jesus said that there was a sower who went to sow some seed, and some of that seed fell by the wayside, and it was trampled down. Keep that in your mind. We're going to come back to that point in just a second here. But first, let's look at verse 11, where Jesus actually explains this parable. He says, "Now the parable is this: the seed is the word of God." And in verse 12, "Those by the wayside are the ones who hear, then the devil comes and takes away the word out of their hearts." And so Jesus uses this parable of the seed and the sower, and he says to us that the seed is the truth, the word of God that is planted in our hearts. And the soil here, that's what the soil is our hearts. And Jesus actually talks about 4 different soil conditions or heart conditions. We're going to look at just the one today, the wayside that had been trampled on. It was hard and impenetrable, and the seed could not get down into it. And so again, this farmer goes out to sow some seed. Now he's not sowing bean seeds in a row, but no, he's broadcasting seed. Maybe this spring you've patched up some bare spots in your yard, and you've cast some grass seed out of a bucket. That's what we're talking about. And you know that as you throw that seed, as you cast it out like this, some of the seed lands exactly where you need it to land. And in order to thoroughly cover that bare spot, you've got to get some of it out along the edges, and it lands in places that's actually unintended to land. And so that's what Jesus says here, is that as this sower went out to sow the seed, some of it landed on good soil, but lots of it landed in places that were not exactly intended for it to grow. And that's okay. Here we want to look at the seed that landed on the wayside. And Luke tells us that that wayside had been trampled on. It had been walked on. It had been run over. And it had gotten hard. And so think about that as a heart condition. Maybe there's a hard place in your heart. I know there has been for me. There have been times in my life when I've been run over by people, by circumstances, and by different situations in life. And I've been let down and disappointed. And I've developed a hard place in my heart. And I just didn't want to hear the truth. Maybe that's you today. I've got good news for you. But first, the bad news. The bad news is there's nothing you or me can do about that. We cannot change our heart, but God can. And we can pray the same prayer that David prayed in the 51st Psalm, where he said, "Create in me a new heart, O God, and give me a contrite spirit." And when he used that word create, when David said, "Create in me, O God, a new heart," it's the same word that we find in Genesis. In the beginning, God created. And so out of nothing, God created. And that's what David is asking God to do. David's not asking God, "Hey, God, please clean up my old heart. Please soften up the inner man that's inside of me so that I can receive the truth." No. From nothing, God, create inside of me a new person who's receptive to the truth. And so if you've got a hard place in your heart, if you're resistant to the truth, ask God to change it, and he'll do that for you. You know, that's true for believers and non-believers alike. And as believers, those of us who are following God, We know that we're called to broadcast that truth all around us, everywhere we go in life. We're to broadcast that truth into other places. And the fact is that some of that seed's going to land on good soil, and some of it's going to land by the wayside on this hard packed soil that's been run over. We're going to find people who've been run over by life, who've been walked on, who've been stepped on, who've been trampled by their circumstances. And so their heart is hard and rejecting the truth. They don't want to hear it, maybe. And that's okay. You know, if you're like me, maybe you're tempted to be disappointed, maybe even disgusted by that person. But here God is teaching us to expect that to happen and realize that we're not in the heart-changing business. We're in the seed-sowing business. God's in the heart-changing business. You see, the Apostle Paul put it like this in the book of Corinthians. He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but it was God who provided the increase. And so I would encourage you today, allow God to plant some seeds of truth in your heart that might grow and produce visible fruit. And if along the path you've discovered a hard place in your heart, ask God to give you a new heart, and He'll do that for you. And then go and sow some seed into other hearts. And if you land in hard places, you don't worry about it. You let God be in the heart-changing business, and you be in the seed-sowing business. Hey, this is Chip Studer. Now you've got my 2 cents for the week. Enjoy the rest of